Book 9. Across the Hindu Kush. Our heroic representatives, politicians in exile, should have this message about their two duties: stop criticizing each other and come here to do some real fighting. Guerrilla from Kohi Daman when asked for a message for Afghans abroad. 1. An Isba in Nuristan. The Kohi Daman foothills, July 3rd. The Shakala commando, bent on finding and capturing the battered old treasure ship on the far Oxus River, set out on July 3rd from the Pagman caves. Less than a half-day's march into the Kohi Daman foothills, fate played a card, and the future of the expedition fell squarely into the hands of a 21-year-old helicopter pilot, Lieutenant Yuri Nikodimov. Afghanistan, even under alien occupation, was crisscrossed by a myriad of caravans like the Eagles. There were some on the spanking new roads of the great circle of highways which engirdled the country, but there were thousands more at any given moment, following the ancient cross-country routes. Nikodimov, on routine patrol, usually paid little attention to these travellers. His job was to look for trouble. 1/3 of the whole population, it was said, was on the move at any one time. You couldn't bother with them all. This bright July day, Nikodimov in the air and the Eagles band on the ground both felt the uplifting joy of the early Afghan summer. The Russian, looking down from his huge Mi-24, glimpsed and dismissed as harmless the small party of no more than 40 people, traders, no doubt. A motley assortment of mules, donkeys, even camels, probably heading for Turkestan before the autumn snows trapped them there for the rest of the year. Here in the foothills the trail wound through the enchanted countryside, whose meadows, orchards and streams, hoopoes and nightingales had moved Afghan poets to compose some of the country's best-loved odes. But there was no cover against air attack, nowhere to shelter, no crags or valleys where people could hide or melt into the background. The eagle and his friends looked up from time to time at the helicopters, on watch and ward duty, seeking infiltrators from the north. There would be no hope if the gunships attacked. As Nikodimov passed over, swooping down to get a better look at the caravan, the vista seemed one of calm and peace. His eyes dwelt on the flocks of sheep in emerald pastures, the quail, the rabbits. He could even see timid white deer standing nervously not far from the trail. There was nothing suspicious about the caravan, but someone must have known its composition, someone connected with the Russians, and alerted them. The radio crackled in Lieutenant Nikodimov's ears. "Based Nikodimov, attention, attention. Notorious bandit nicknamed the Eagle and his band, believed attempting to break out beyond Pagman disguised as caravan, heading north. White horse in front, black one in rear. Find and destroy, repeat, destroy these bandits." Automatically, the lieutenant acknowledged the message and went back to have another look at the plodding beasts below. He took the helicopter lower, its great bulk swooping just a few hundred meters over the line of animals. Yes, that was it. Positive identification. As he completed his pass over the meadow through which the caravan was passing, Nikodimov caught his breath at the beauty of the place. Trees, just enough of them to relieve the flatness, rushing streams and the brows of the distant mountains, the haunting blue-green of the Afghan upland light. His craft had swooped so low that he could even smell the richness of the forest leaves. One part of the pilot's mind was running strictly to routine. Signal to helibase, bandits sighted, going into attack. Then circle once to maneuver into a correct sighting position while alerting the bomb aimer and the machine gunner. Must give them time to prepare. Then attack. 2 or 3 passes should be enough. gunfire, high explosives, and phosphorus bombs to finish off the enemy, the so-called Eagle. Then another thought intruded, started to take over, and Senior Lieutenant Yuri Nikodemov's mind was filled with another scene, a scene of 9 months before. It had been in Nuristan, the mysterious part of the country to the east, where he had been on a reconnaissance mission in another Mi-24. In those high mountains, Nikodemov had swerved a precarious route through a gorge and come too near to an outjutting rock, 1/2 meter too close. That was the length of the main rotor blade sheared off by the rock. The craft shuddered, yawed, steadied for a moment. It held just enough lift for the pilot to put it down, preciously, on the very edge of a cliff face. He could see the sheer drop an arm span from the aircraft's nose, and he threw himself through the door onto a ledge, even as the giant gunship tilted, slid forward, and then toppled into the deep valley, pieces flying off as it was battered against the jagged rock spears, jutting out from every side. From his ledge, Lieutenant Nikodemov saw the machine, with the rest of the 4-man crew, come to rest at the bottom of the valley. Soon afterwards there was a loud report as the fuel tanks exploded, then a dense cloud of oily smoke. Finally, the entire wreck was encircled by roaring flames. Nobody could have survived that. He clawed his way off the ledge onto the cliff top, shocked but unhurt, and lay panting on the ground. When he felt better, Nikodemov looked around him. This place might have been on another planet. Huge cedar trees, high mountains stark against the sky, eerie silence. Nuristan, Land of Light, renamed 100 years before by the Afghan king Abdur Rahman Khan, who disliked the old name, Kafiristan, Land of the Infidels. He climbed down until he came to a small valley hemmed in by rocks, 100 feet or so above the valley proper. It was tree-covered in places, bare in others, and, like a garden, well supplied with bushes and flowering plants of all kinds, all designed by nature. Nikodemov, through some process which he, briefly, thought of as a return to the mentality of some remote ancestor, began to think of this place as his very own, and of himself, the former city dweller, ballettermain and dashing pilot, as the man who belonged here, the man for whom this place had been waiting. 2 months went by. No Russian aircraft had passed overhead. The year was turning, the leaves yellowing in the forests, though there was still food to be gathered. The man collected mulberries, found pine kernels, dug up roots, tried various leaves and flowers to vary his diet. He was in good enough health, but in these high mountains where the air was thin, he tired easily. He had thought many times about getting away. North of where he had built what he called his izba, no more than a Russian peasant hut roofed with branches, there was nothing but a huge, sheer mountain wall, with the snow line almost daily descending as it became cooler, as if it was eating away at the valley in the high ranges which he shared with the wolves, a few deer, birds, hedgehogs, and a multitude of other small animals whose names he did not know. To the west, as he knew from aerial maps, there were more mountains, clad in tall pines, their cliffs so perpendicular that none could climb them to reach the next valley without ropes and pitons. And the next valley beyond that, what if it were just the same? This was the Hindu Kush, the Hindu Killer Mountains, and he was an outcast, lost in the wastes of the ancient Kafiristan, one of the least known lands on earth. The east or south, those were the options. Day after day he thought about the problem, but there was something about the mountains, the altitude perhaps, or the food, or even about his own nature, which made it harder and harder with each day to come to a decision. Besides, if he left the Izba, would he always be sure to find food? Would the mountains be even higher, the snow line lower, the glaciers larger, the ice cliffs more menacing? It was these thoughts which soon took him over, even when he had tried walking towards a possible escape route. He always returned to the Izba, to his home. At first he had thought a great deal about his real home, about his family. He had also feared that if he stayed there, his enemies, the Afghan bandits, would get him, or that he might fall ill, perhaps with appendicitis, simple to deal with when there was a doctor, but a killer when you were alone. Then these matters had seemed more and more remote, unreal. He had started to wonder instead whether he should enlarge the Izba, make some sort of weapon to use for hunting, collect seeds so that he could grow his own crops, especially those delicious sunflower seeds, or perhaps more berries. There were wild onions, carrots, mulberries by the ton, and there were so many fascinating plants, edelweiss even, who would have imagined that? And rhododendrons everywhere, masses of pomegranates. He might catch fish. There were many in the streams. But autumn was coming, and this would be his first winter here. First of how many? And what was happening in the world? The world, because this place was not in the real world at all. 2 months was all it had been, but that was enough to tell the man that, when you were alone, you became someone else, someone different, someone you would rather be. As he sat at the entrance of the Izba, looking down over the valley, his own valley, where, perhaps, no man but he had trod for years, another thought struck him. Of course, it was the rest of them that were trapped. He was what people were like once, what everyone really should be like, free of desires and free of discontent. Unknown to Lieutenant Nikodimov, there was a transverse cleft between the mountains, and it connected his valley to another where people lived. One of these people was Shtasu Zijik, the hunter, and Shtasu was very angry at what he had just seen. He touched the hilt of his ancient ceremonial dagger for luck, and ran out of his wooden house which was perched, like an alpine chalet, on the mountain near the town of Kamdesh. Like most Nuristanis, he did not concern himself with strangers overmuch, although he was always polite to them. If they behaved themselves, that was. But this, he thought, as he took his shotgun from the decorated wooden rack at the doorway, was too much. A strange-looking vehicle, of the kind he would soon know well enough as an assault helicopter, had made 3 sweeps over the little town and had dropped something which burst into flames and had even set the butter and cheese shed on fire. He could imagine Mas Wusup and his men trying to put out the flames and wish that he had been there to help him. But perhaps he would be able to do something just as good instead. Deal with this intruder. The rotorcraft had turned again to make another pass, and by that time Shtasu was ready. Steadying the gun on a rock, as he would when stalking an approaching snow leopard, he waited silently. The gun did not have a very long effective range, 75 meters, but it was loaded with heavy shot which would stop a deer, a big black buck, or a bear dead in its tracks. He willed the aircraft to come a little closer. "Come on, Kakiwa, big bird, whoever you are, and you'll get something special here." Suddenly, as if in answer to his invitation, the helicopter, to get a better look and to take photographs, careered towards him. Shtasu had never been out of Nuristan, the strange country of blonde, blue-eyed mountaineers whom people had thought to be the descendants of the lost armies of Alexander the Great. Shtasu spoke only Nuristani really well, and he wore the red, black, and white woven headgear and long wool cloak of the country. The British, a century ago, had believed that the Nuristanis shared the same ancestry as the Europeans, partly because of their looks, and also because they sat on chairs and ate at tables instead of on the floor. The simple, open-handed Nuristanis, when they first saw Westerners, had also described themselves as brothers of the Franks. Shtasu knew about guns, and because of his 20 years as a hunter, was known as Achichi, the Eye. His present weapon, moreover, was semi-automatic, one of the best, made by Luigi Franchi of Brescia in Italy. It had been a gift from a big game hunter for whom Shtasu had shot several snow leopards and an ovis poli, the great wild sheep, whose huge curved horns were so much prized by collectors. Naturally, the foreign gentleman would now be able to say that he had felled them himself. A Frank called Marco Polo had, apparently, told the West about these animals. Here it was then, the big Kakiwa. It must be 300 meters away and was closing very fast. The helicopter was colored in swathes of camouflage paint, and to the hunter it looked like some monstrous, bat-like tiger of the skies, diving towards him. He took aim. It still came on, unaware of the single man in the red goatskin boots and black cape, squinting along the Browning-type barrel, on a crag in the middle of nowhere. As it came nearer, the Nuristani gently squeezed the trigger. Easy now. He could see a gun barrel in its nose, a big one. This was a hostile Kakiwa, all right. But this would not be more difficult than killing a really big black bear. After all, they closed in and clutched you. The helicopter had moved its angle of approach slightly and was heading for him almost sideways. That was a pity. He would not, after all, be able to get it in the nose. And it was travelling faster than he had thought, unused as he was to estimating distance with such game. Flying sideways. He would have to strike it from behind as it passed below him through the valley. In that way he might wound it anyway. As it roared past with a great wind, Shtasu panned his gun on the rock and fired. What the hunter did not know was that the huge Mi-24s were patched, in vulnerable places, with armor, which could easily withstand the heaviest shotgun ball. Armored, that is, with titanium steel to protect the pilot from below, from the sides, but not from behind or above. The Soviets would learn that lesson later, when they'd lost enough of them to snipers. The big bullet crashed through the glass and went through the back of the Russian pilot's neck, coming out at the other side and crashing to the cockpit floor, stopped only by the inner surface of the bulletproof glass windscreen. Range 60 meters. The helicopter had been diving through the valley 200 feet away and 20 feet below him when he fired. Kara? Where was it? He peered down. There it lay, a mass of burning wreckage in a river at the bottom of his valley, 400 feet below. There should be some useful pickings there when it cooled down. That might help Mas Wasup's buttermakers to pay for the damage. Some of it was metal. Useful for the blacksmith. The hunter Shtasu, the Eye, looked over to where the dairy people were running about near the sheds, looking less like agitated ants now. Good. They'd got the fire out. Like a mad sky elephant, that Kakiwa, smashing something that had nothing to do with him. Well, he'd heard about mad elephants. They had to be killed. He'd go to see Wassup now, and visit the Kakiwa's carcass later. Yuri Nikodimov had seen the helicopter swoop, had heard the crash of the explosion when it bombed the Kamdesh butter shed, had seen it return. And when he heard the report of the shot from Shtasu's gun, and saw the Mi-24 fall, he realized that the war had caught up with him. The Russian put on his flying jacket and jackboots, picked up his stick and started to scramble down the mountain towards the wreck. Why, he did not know. As he got near, the blast of the exploding shells, cartridges and bombs threw him into a crevasse. By the time he had struggled free and found the way again, all was silent. As he approached, he saw that the fire was out. Whether burnt out or blown out by the explosions, he was not sure. The framework lay like the skeleton of a gigantic whale. There was no sign of a survivor. There was no point in staying here. Best to get back to the Izba. Nikodimov started up the slope again, finding what looked like a bridle path. He had only taken about 30 steps when he saw, coming from the opposite direction, another man. Wusup hadn't needed the hunter's help, and had signalled to him across the crags that all was now under control. As he made his way towards the wreck of the helicopter, Shtasu saw, coming up the path from the opposite direction, a man. Strange. First a big false bird, like a carriage in the sky, and then a man coming from it. Had he been inside? Perhaps he was one of those men who rode sky carriages. Yes, of course. Shtasu had heard about them. Everyone in Nuristan was proud that it was one of them, a Nuristani who had gone to Kabul and had become Commandant-e-Tiara, commander of the flyers. They had roaring sky carriages, it was said. The two men stopped and looked at one another. Shtasu saw a Frank, a man in Faranki clothes at any rate, but with a full beard and carrying a stick, otherwise unarmed. Like one of those foreign hunters who used to come here years ago. Perhaps he was an Afghan of some kind, an orderly. They were only a few meters apart now. Shtasu decided to try Pashtu. He knew a little. "Starai, Mashe, may you never be tired," he said. The man shook his head. Shtasu pointed to himself. "Shtasu." He indicated the sky and the sun. His name meant starshine. Surely this man would understand that. There was no response, so he tried sign language. The people of Nuristan used it all the time because, at a distance, the roar of the waterfalls drowned speech, even shouts. No, sign language didn't work with this stranger. The Russian looked at Shtasu. He'd never seen anything like this apparition before. Wearing Nuristani breeches, a black coat of fine wool, with blue eyes, fair hair, and carrying a very modern automatic shotgun, a powerful one. Shtasu tried again, this time with the only Persian phrase he knew, which the orderlies said to one another. "Manda nabashan, may you never be tired." Then, "Kara kakiwa, where's the bird?" Didn't he understand anything? The other man was looking at his gun. "Stwa, 4 shots, Shtasu explained. Better reassure him. "Rorim, my brother." The Russian spoke now in his own language, telling him he didn't understand. "Ya ni gavariu Nuristansky." He must be some kind of an Afghan, thought Shtasu. Foreigners surely didn't ride about in kakiwas. "Tushish ordali?" He pointed to Nikodimov. Then, touching his own breast, he said, "Mam Nuristani." The lieutenant understood. Nuristani, of course. "Mam Ruski," he said. Ruski? What was that? Shtasu wondered. Some kind of Frankish person? He spoke again. "Tushish Faranki?" "Franki, da, Tavarish." He was a Frank, after all. Anyway, the Faranki was unarmed. He should be welcomed. The Nuristani took some dried apricots from his leather pouch. "You're Eat. Understanding the gesture, Nikodimov accepted the fruit and offered Shtasu some jalgosas, pine kernels, from his pocket. Shtasu took 2 or 3 as a token of goodwill. The Russian gestured to him to take more. Shtasu wasn't hungry. Besides, the niceties had been sufficiently observed. He smiled. Mam aljech, I have already eaten. Kujast amu? Where was this stranger's house? He had to draw a hut on the soil with a twig before the Russian understood. The man was asking about his izba. Nikodimov pointed up towards the small valley above them. Together, the 2 men climbed up to where the little shack rested against a rock. Now Shtasu understood. This man was some kind of a traveller, and as such he was his guest, protected by the sacred laws of hospitality. But he could not stay here. It was going to be too dangerous. Little by little he managed to convey that, however nice this place might be at the moment, it would not be long before it was impossible to survive there. Water, dash, rain, zim, snow. Shtasu gestured, showing how the snow line would come down, how rain would fall, how snow would pile up 3 meters high, in spite of the sun throughout the winter. Best to get away. Come to my house, brother, you are welcome. With signs and a medley of words in the Dari Nuristani lingua franca, the hunter took his new guest to his own home. There was no airstrip in all Nuristan, and the Afghan governor and officials had defected from the communist regime, most of them taking refuge in nearby Pakistan. Nuristan had been cut off from Afghanistan for a year and was only occasionally patrolled by reconnaissance aircraft. Salt and small manufactured articles like needles were now difficult or impossible to get. Nuristan was returning to its ancient, medieval, self-sufficient economy. Things were to remain very much the same for a few months more, until the Russians tried to conquer the ancient land. When that happened, the Nuristanis put up such a fight that both the unwilling Afghan troops sent ahead and the Russian soldiers, untrained for mountain warfare, were wiped out or put to flight in one engagement after another. The Russians fell back on mass air attacks on civilians, bombing every town and any village they could find with fire and high explosives. Still, they could not demoralize the Nuristanis, and the fight continued. The people who had defied the armies of Alexander the Great were not impressed by their new enemies, with or without modern technology. But that was later. In the meantime, faithful to their age-old code of hospitality, the Nuristanis looked after the Russian lieutenant well, and arranged for a party of men to take him to the Afghan administrative border, where he was handed back to the Soviet authorities. When Nikodimov had asked people who knew Nuristan the meaning of the word bana, which the people of the mountains had said to him so often, they had said, "It means roar in Pashto, barada in Persian, brother." That had been 9 months ago. With the call of the forest in his mind and the hospitality of the mountain villagers in his heart, with the picture of Shtasu the hunter holding up his hand in farewell clearly before him, Nikodimov now wheeled the rotorcraft away, towards his distant landing pad. He would not defile his honour. He would return one day guiltless to the Izba, his home among the tall cedars of Nuristan. The lieutenant flicked the transmission switch. Nikodimov to helibase. No sighting of a terrorist caravan. The upland valley is clear of suspicious figures right to the mountains. I repeat, no sign of bandits. Helibase to Nikodimov. Nichevo, never mind, comrade lieutenant. Must be a false alarm. Resume normal duty and return to base as scheduled. Helibase out. Nobody else in the helicopter seemed to have seen the caravan. So he had not really taken much of a risk, the lieutenant thought, as he covertly checked the crew's behavior. Someday, Lieutenant Nikodimov was sure he would return to Nuristan, but not in a kakiwa like this, not in a uniform, not as a foreigner. Just now, of course, he had to carry on. He had relatives in Leningrad to think of, and his oath as an officer. He was not ready yet. He grinned to himself. The eagle must be feeling good. Good luck, Bana, brother eagle. You are still free.